Welcome to Botcasters, the podcast dedicated to bringing you the latest news, insights and expert opinions on conversational AI, chatbots, voicebots, and the future of innovation in this field. We are proud to announce that we are working together with the European Chatbot Conference in Edinburgh, and we will be interviewing interesting speakers. We want to provide independent and objective knowledge for our community, share real-world successes and failures, and connect people with the expertise that they need. It has been a great and fun journey so far. A big shout out to all the experts that were on Botcasters and shared their expertise and vision. Be sure to subscribe to the Botcasters podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and follow us on social media. Hope to talk to you at the European Chatbot Conference in Edinburgh. See you soon. Welcome, Jared Browne.
Hi, Doran. How are you today?
I'm very good. Glad to have you here. And we're at a good moment in time because you'll be at the summit talking about legal framework, specifically the EU AI Act. And now, very, very recently, that got sort of the nod of approval, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very long, drawn-out process. So we got approval on Friday. So it looks like the vote in March or April will be a formality to actually make it law, which is just in time before this European Parliament disbands in May. So at the 11th hour.
So for the people who are listening, you'll be talking about it, but what does it contain? If you would summarize it, what does the EU AI Act mean for corporations or people who are in conversational AI? How are they going to feel this?
Yeah, so I suppose if we think about where the EU started or why did they introduce the AI Act? So they had what you would call soft law going back to 2018, so guidelines on trustworthy AI. The general feeling was that wasn't going to have an impact on the market. So in 2021, the Commission drafted the EU AI Act, and that has gone through an awful lot of versions. And we had trilogues before Christmas, 32 hours of negotiation, lots of pain, no sleep, lots of strong coffee, I would say. Now we have an act in place. And I think, so really for companies, the person who's going to feel the most pain is what's called the provider of AI. So you're the one who developed it, sold it. And the big clincher really is that the EU has put this wall up around the EU, which is that if an AI system is high risk and if it's not sufficiently safe and fair and all these things, they can stop it from being released on the EU market. There are also huge fines, but really the real comply or die moment is a provider's software, AI, machine learning can be blocked from trading in the EU. And then I guess the heart of the act is that risk pyramid. You could be in unacceptable risk, which are going to be banned use cases. You could be in high risk, which is where all of the compliance obligations would be. And then you can be in limited or minimal risk, which will have very limited transparency obligations. So for example, if you've developed a chatbot or if there's a chatbot being used on your site, you would just have to declare that transparently. By the way, you're now interacting with a chatbot. So there's also innovation sandboxes, however, so the EU is trying to make this innovation friendly. And I suppose if we just think about the overall purpose at the beginning, what the EU said it wanted to do was make sure that AI would be safe and fair, but also be able to thrive. So this is about trying to stop AI from undermining itself. It's not about trying to stop the fun, it's trying to make sure that the fun keeps going, but in a way that we all reap the benefits, including businesses, but most importantly, society, obviously.
But if you say you have this pyramid of risk, and I've seen it, of course. My experience is if you think you're low risk, this red line tends to move. So if you build around low risk and you don't take any measures, you end up getting into trouble because this line is moving or something is injected where it all of a sudden becomes medium risk and you need to do other stuff. So my question is, shouldn't as a company, should you prepare or look at the AI you're using with the glasses of, okay, this is medium or high risk, and what should I do to safeguard it? And then still you could be on the safe end.
Yeah, I think, yeah. So the pyramid isn't static, right? So I suppose obviously when we look at it visually all the time, we might think it's static, but you can move up through the grades. You could be beneath the high risk level, but veer in there because the reality is not only does the technology change, but the use cases is as well. So maybe the pressure from management is going to be, can we do more? Can we do slightly riskier things? So for sure, a company, I think at the get-go, any company is going to need to do some form of inventory, right? So what AI and machine learning do we even use ourselves? And then what do we buy in from third parties that's already in the products? Yeah, that's going to be the 101 part, is that assessment initially to understand which category you fall into. And it may be low risk, and that's fine. Um, but companies have to have that conversation and have that internal understanding of where they lie on that pyramid, and for sure that it's not static.
And maybe we should have an example, because one of the things we discussed is that let's say a company does online marketing, right, and retargeting of customers. Now they usually use SaaS software for that. A lot of it is running in the States, and there is AI machine learning in that software to do that automatically,
Yeah,
because it's processing a lot of data continuously and live, and then doing stuff with it.
yeah,
That would come and fall under the European AI Act. And at least that's my thought.
yeah,
And what I see is that this is just one example. A lot of companies have no idea that they're using this kind of software, that the stuff they're already using is actually not hurt or hit, but
yeah.
it falls under the new regulations, and they need to, as you said, talk to their suppliers about it.
Yeah, there are some unpleasant surprises on the way for companies, all right. And certainly where you're a deployer and you're already used to using a provider's AI or machine learning. And I think so, like you said, so the extraterritoriality, hard word to say, that's in there just like the GDPR. So if you develop the software in America but sell it into the EU, it's still caught. But the other one, which is this thing in the tail and very ambiguous, if the software is developed in the US but never sold into the EU, but the outputs of the machine learning affect people in the EU, that's still caught as well. So that's really, really wide and very,
Wow.
very vague. Um, but
How are they going to manage that?
I don't think anyone knows yet. No one has told me yet how that's going to work or how that's going to be managed. But they really are trying to catch every last vestige of how an EU citizen could be impacted, and obviously try to stop companies circumnavigating it. But if you look at that specific example on the targeted advertising, I think one thing that's going to affect the advertising industry is one of the banned use cases. So this is completely illegal. You can't do it, is to use subliminal techniques to influence vulnerable people. So old people, people who are sick or mentally disabled, whatever it might be.
Or
I mean,
young kids?
kids as well. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, we know that a lot of platforms, children may actually be the main users, or certainly like TikTok, for example, would have a large segment which would be children. So that's a very gray area. So when does a unacceptable targeting using subliminal techniques, when is that a bad thing and when is it just completely legitimate advertising? Because I suppose at the end of the day, advertising is a form of persuasion and it can be good or bad or whatever. Um, that's going to be certainly a painful one if I was in e-commerce or online advertising. And the thing for companies maybe in the EU is the way the act is structured is there's four players who have obligations: the provider, the distributor, the importer, and the deployer. So the deployer is the company at the end of it who uses it. And the deployer has far less obligations than the provider, but they still do have some obligations. They have to oversee the use of the tool in their company because partly obviously some risks are only realized at the end use case. And also they're expected to put in place the instructions that the provider provides them with to make sure that it works safely and fairly. So no deployer is off the hook either. That's the other thing that an EU company needs to understand.
So is it a bit similar? Is it going to be a bit similar like with the GDPR, where you have to for instance, sign a contract with a supplier where if they get your data in a SaaS solution, what they can do with it or what they can't do with it? You know what I mean?
It's kind of similar, except that to an extent, this is the world upside down compared to GDPR, because in the GDPR context, the provider would only be just a processor. You'd be calling all the shots. You'd be the controller. Whereas here, this is different, really. The provider is the one who's considered to have primary responsibility, and you're just a user of it. So it's going to flip the responsibility upside down, but it does create a problem as well for how do you mirror obligations under the AI Act with obligations under the GDPR. You could have the same relationship with the same company, but it'll be interpreted two different ways under the two different acts. That's another one that we won't have time to figure out today, right? But that's a big one again for companies to understand.
Yeah,
Um,
and hard to manage.
and it comes from the fact that so when the EU were trying to figure out how to regulate AI, they had a couple of options of how to structure the regulation, and there were three or four thrown on the table. The one they went for was product liability. So this is just a product liability regulation. If you stripped out AI, there's been product liability regulation in the EU for decades. And there's an existing CE scheme there. There's existing standards authorities who check. So you can't sell dangerous toys into the EU in case they blow up in your child's hand. So they've just decided to slot AI into a completely existing product liability regime. And so I've been at conversations with the Commission in Europe about this and why they did that. And one of the reasons they said was, well, we just want certainty. Everyone's used to dealing with product liability. So let's call AI a product. Let's slot it in under that. So this is partly why you're getting this top-down responsibility element. The providers has all the responsibility, because in product liability, you built the product, you sell it, you're responsible for it. So that was a choice that they made. And that's what we're living with now. It's going to be deemed as product liability, and that's the world it's fitted into.
But if you think about that, then it becomes really complicated, because you have a lot of companies that use AI in their product or connected to their product. So eventually the provider of the LLM, like OpenAI or Anthropic, is responsible. And yet we know half of the time they have no clue how, when there's an input, how that leads to a certain output. So how can you well, they have the responsibility, but how can you manage it? It becomes sort of an uninsurable risk, because you can't explain how you got there. It's not like you manufacture something where you change a knob and then you get a better product.
Yeah, I mean, it's the value chain is very complicated already in these systems, and there can be thousands of downstream use cases for any general purpose AI. And the early arguments from the providers, the likes of Google and so on, was that we can't be responsible for downstream risks because we have no clue what happens at the end. So initially, there wasn't actually going to be any obligations on the providers of general purpose AI. And general purpose AI didn't even make it into the first version of the Act, which sounds amazing at this stage. But I think one of the risks to look out for if you are a deployer, and this is where the provider stops being responsible, there's a clause in the Act which is basically saying if you make a substantial modification to the AI system, it could actually create a new system, and you would now be the provider, and you would now be fully responsible.
So let's take this one step deeper, not be technical. So if I have a company and a large corporation, and we say, okay, you know what? Let's train this model only on our enormous amounts of data we have in our company.
Yeah.
And basically it becomes trained, the model becomes trained on that data and does whatever it does based on that data, combined with all the knowledge and data it already has.
Yeah.
Does that change the model? Because it's different, and then it's very specific all of a sudden. It's just for that company, right?
Yeah, that's a good idea, right? If you're a company, it's a safer way of controlling your data. You can tell your shareholders, you can tell the board, this is all in-house. We're getting all the power of ChatGPT-4, but it's just ours. But I guess the problem with it is that so fine-tuning a large language model could amount to a substantial modification of the system. That's already being talked about. There isn't a straight answer to that, but it is a definite contender at the moment for substantial modification. But very context specific.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. But if you take it back a level up, then the question that should be asked in the boardroom is like, okay, if we are training, if we're taking decisions on AI, we want to do stuff with it. But if we're training our own models or model, are we becoming a provider or are we staying a deployer? And how do you know? How do you find this threshold? Where nobody knows where it is yet.
No, they don't. No, and these are the prescribed risk assessments under the Act and the self-assessment. So it is one of, I suppose, it is a weakness, if you want to call it that, of the Act, all right, that it is initially going to amount to self-assessment for companies to figure this out. But yeah, certainly if that conversation of fine-tuning a model comes up in a boardroom, where that would need to go is, okay, fine, if we want to do this, what are the benefits and so on? But we need to understand the risks, and are we now actually becoming a provider, and do we even want to do that if that's the case? And it may be that the answer is no.
And is it an insurable risk as a liability? Because that's the other point. Some companies have a mandatory liability insurance for whatever they do, especially in financial services. You know this as well. I would imagine if you don't know, it becomes an uninsurable risk.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah, without being an insurance expert, but I wouldn't be very happy with that level of uncertainty anyway if I was an exec or a board member. No. And you'll get very little latitude from financial services regulators with any use of technology, especially when customers are potentially affected.
Yeah, makes sense.
Very little latitude.
And well, that makes perfect sense because the regulators in Holland, they say anything you do needs to be able to be reconstructed. And if you can't reconstruct it, then we can't check that if your algorithm is right or constructed in the right way. So, and because the models change the whole time, input today might give output B, and tomorrow output C. Well, the input is still A. So so that is an inherent problem which you can't introduce into your company because it's not accepted by regulators.
No.
And I agree. To be honest.
And so there's a degree of certainty there at the moment around, for example, automated solutions with lending. So you'll get quite basic kind of expert systems used by banks where it's just clear rules. If A, then B. So if Jared has defaulted on 10 loans, we're probably not giving him a loan, right? It's very fixed rules. You can explain it to anyone. And
it's the same for everyone.
It's the same for everyone. Yeah, exactly. So there can't really be bias. But you'll find, so Ireland is the country I operate in, but the regulator here will tell financial institutions, it's a very simple one line, you have to be able to explain how your loans work. That's it.
That's reconstructible. Same thing.
That's it, yeah. And then it's over to an institution, and do I really want to introduce this now if explainability has a big question mark after it?
Since we're talking about the boardroom anyway, one of the inherent risks I see in AI is that all these big corporations are going to cloud computing, and it's being pushed for by the Alphabets of this world and AWS and Microsoft, and also recent reports we saw that especially these companies are making big money there. That's where the profits are coming from. So while pushing AI as well, that takes more cloud computing, so equals more profit. And they like to sell as many tokens as possible, of course, which I understand. Now, switch back to the company. If you introduce AI in every corner of your company and everything is in the cloud, then the threshold to move to another, especially if you train the AI specifically on your data, the threshold to move to another is really, really high. It's expensive.
Yeah,
and it's time consuming, and I think companies are looking for ways to throw out stuff and work with less people and have AI do things. My thought is that you're introducing as a company, if you're not thinking about it, you're introducing this inherent risk where you have no control anymore over the cost base of your company. And basically, it's big tech deciding what your cost base is going to be. These are my thoughts. What is your vision on this?
Yeah, well, I suppose one risk that regulators have expected companies to take account of for a long time is vendor lock-in risk with any technology. And you'd see this a lot in, I work in the data protection world a lot as well, so we do DPIAs on cloud migrations.
Yeah.
And one risk that we always talk about is vendor lock-in. So if we're unhappy with these guys, how easy is it actually to move from them to a competitor? And so we're in a difficult position if the answer back is, well, it's going to be really hard, it won't even be worth our while. And you're in an even worse position if you say, we're not totally even happy with the solution, but what can we do? Here we are. So vendor lock-in risk, I think, should be looked at, which means that you interrogate the provider of the LLM and say to them, well, if we decide we need to move, can we do it? Can you put in place procedures for this? Is it allowable? Whatever. And it's wise to proceed then if you can see a path where there is an ability to actually switch to a competitor. It's not so wise to proceed then on those terms if you feel you are genuinely locked in. But I mean, that risk has always been there, has always been assessed, and I think it needs to be applied in the same way here. Maybe the stakes are higher now. That changes things as well, but the logic is the same.
Well, Dave. Well, thanks for that. That is a clear answer. But with cloud computing, it was always about cost savings and being more scalable, which makes perfect sense up to a certain point where they say, okay, but now the energy price has gone up and the cost of servers and chips has gone up, et cetera, et cetera. You have no control. They just raise the price. And putting in your own server park then becomes kind of expensive if you need to move back. What I anticipate is that if you train a model of a certain company in a certain way, the way a lot of companies are doing it now, that you're automatically creating your vendor lock-in yourself. You have, because if you change the model of OpenAI, it doesn't apply to Anthropic. You need to redo it, and what works in one doesn't work in the other. It doesn't give the same output. So it's a lock-in by design, and it's exactly what they want, because that's where they make their money. So I don't know how to manage that, but it kind of worries me that companies are taking these decisions very lightly. Even if you think about Microsoft Copilot, which I think, it's a great addition to it's a lock-in because it's trained at some point on the data in your company, and that can help you write pieces for your company. But if you want to change to Google, it will be probably impossible because it uses Bard, for instance.
Yeah. Actually, you've just invented a new phrase there, lock-in by design. I must use that myself. And I think...
Feel free.
Yeah. I think what I can see with companies is them being under enormous pressure to be seen to be doing something in the area of generative AI. And I don't know the specific answer, right, to how do we get out of that lock-in by design if using one model over the other is so entrenched. But there is definitely a race at the moment for companies to just integrate with one of them. And a Copilot is happening quickly, but you can also see applications built on Azure OpenAI. What I tell people and companies when I'm talking to them is take your time and slow down. If this is so big a deal, if this is going to be so transformative, why would you be rushing it? So, it takes 10 years to become a doctor, right? You don't rush that because it's an important thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, you want your doctor to be well equipped and knowledgeable.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think also what I say is let's just let the fog disperse because the hype machine is on overdrive.
Yep.
And we necessarily need to see where things land when the hype just dies down a little bit. And the large scale implementations are still thin on the ground. kind of what we see is kind of modest, smaller, achievable ones based on highly defined use cases. And I think we're likely to see maybe lots of little ones, but very few companies will adopt it at large scale for critical tasks. That to me is some time off. But there is a rush to get entrenched with some of these technologies, and as you say, the lock-in risk may not be fully considered in that discussion.
Yeah, and the big tech is pushing it away as it's a non-issue, but it is an issue, especially if it starts replacing people. And I see companies wanting to do that.
Yeah, I think the likelihood with people, and we discussed this earlier as well, is that generative AI, I don't think generative AI is going to take my job. What's going to take my job is somebody who's able to use generative AI. So I think what's expected is, or what we can see maybe in 2, 3, 5 years, is that it'll become normal that I work beside these tools. But they're not powerful enough or transformative enough for me that they would be leading to mass job losses anytime soon.
It will change jobs, though.
It'll change jobs. Yeah, it'll change jobs. And I suppose every employee, including me and everybody else, has to sort of adjust to that and say, what does this mean for me now? And do I want to get used to it? So we're in the realm really of it's a taught partner. But I think for all companies at these early stages, everything, you can be curious, you can use these technologies, but everything has to be done within a kind of a zero trust compliance framework. So human review, no such thing as complete trust in what this is doing. So put that zero trust program in place so that you can govern it and oversee it and have human review. Then by all means, be very curious within that safe area and learn.
And start learning.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. I mean, of course, there are risks. That's one side of the flip side of the coin. But the other important side is that you need to learn and understand strategically where it starts out adding value to your business or in your value chain.
Yeah.
And the earlier you start using it and experimenting, the better you're capable to take a proper strategic decision with understanding all the inherent risks. Is there one last important takeaway you would give our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I think I've probably already said it, but I think the important thing is to take your time as a business and assess what you want to do with this. Understand the AI Act. Okay, it's going to be in law in a month, so you can read it now. There's no more maybes. Also, start thinking about introducing possibly an AI officer or giving that responsibility to someone in your teams. A lot of data science teams, for example, at the moment, and compliance teams are being given AI governance as a role. And then I think the most practical starting point to give yourself a head start is start looking at an AI inventory. Just start looking across your business. What do I use myself and what do I buy in? And also begin thinking about where you might sit on that risk pyramid. Because if you're in the high risk one, it's a whole world of difference to you.
And then you only have 2 years, only, because it seems like a lot, but it's not.
No, it's not going to be a lot. No, because some companies actually said that the EU and Google, I remember at one conference saying we need at least 4 years to do this. But that was never a runner.
No, I understand. They don't like Google. That's another thing.
Yeah, maybe not bosom buddies. Yeah.
Jared, thank you very much. I enjoyed our talk, and I hope people are coming to the summit to see you and speak to you and listen to you. And if there's any news or updates, please feel free. You're more than welcome on the show. And we'll talk extensively about it or use case so that people can learn more about as this interesting story unfolds, because it is an unfolding story, because there's a lot unknown.
Plenty more to say. Yeah, absolutely.
And to discover. So thank you very much, Jared.
You're welcome.
See you in Edinburgh.
Great. See you there, Dorian. Bye now.